Something changed the moment that question was asked. Not a shout, not an insult, a calm, respectful question about free speech asked directly to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in public, and suddenly the script broke. Because this wasn't just about AOC, this wasn't just about a town hall, and it definitely wasn't just about hate speech. This question landed after the Charlie Kirk fallout, after conservatives watched one of their most influential voices silenced forever, and it hit at the exact same moment that the left is trying to redraw the lines of what Americans are allowed to say. I mean, you could feel it, guys. AOC tried to reframe, she tried to soften, she tried to blur hate, incitement, and speech into one muddy concept. But the more she talked, the worse it got. Because here's the truth that they don't want debated out loud. If the government gets to decide which ideas are too dangerous to say, free speech is already dead. And now, with Donald Trump back in the White House, that old game of narrative control, it isn't working anymore. Conservatives are pushing back, campuses are pushing back, and voters are definitely pushing back. And moments like this, whether it's for Democrats or Republicans, one question, one answer, one meltdown are lighting the fuse nationwide. Tonight, we're breaking down why this exchange mattered, why Charlie Kirk's legacy is all over it, and why the fight over free speech is no longer theoretical, because this wasn't a debate. This was a warning shot, and it's spreading. Make sure to subscribe, hit the like button. I really appreciate your support, guys. Let's go ahead and rewind to how this actually started, because the details matter a lot here, okay? So this was not a protest. It wasn't some heckler. This wasn't someone trying to own AOC with a cheap gotcha. It was a Queens town hall, calm room, open floor, and a Trump-supporting constituent stood up, identified himself honestly, and asked a measured intellectual question about free speech. He didn't accuse, he didn't raise his voice, he didn't insult anyone. Instead, he framed the question philosophically: whether the freedom to hate without violence or threats is actually the highest form of freedom in free society. That is when everything shifted, because that question right there forces a binary answer. You either believe speech is free or you don't. AOC knew it instantly. You could hear it in her hesitation, you could see it in the pivot, and she wasn't prepared to answer yes. And she couldn't say no without exposing everything. This is when the panic started. Now, here's what the question was really asking and why the left absolutely hates it, okay? Freedom of hate does not mean freedom to threaten. There's a big difference. Freedom to hate, freedom to threaten. Totally different. It does not mean freedom to incite violence. It means the freedom to express ideas, beliefs, and opinions that others find offensive without government punishment. That distinction is the entire First Amendment. The Constitution does not protect speech because it's polite. It protects speech precisely because it can be ugly, it can be unpopular, and it can be uncomfortable. And AOC knew that. So instead of answering the question directly, she reframed it emotionally, turning a legal concept into a moral judgment. That's the move. Because if she admits hate speech is protected, the entire censorship framework collapses. And if she denies it, well, then she's openly rejecting the Constitution. So either way, she would fail. So she had to redefine speech itself. Not legally, not constitutionally, but emotionally. This is where the concept truly begins. And this is where it crossed the line. Because once the constituent pushed back, calmly, logically, something changed in the room. AOC wasn't being attacked. She wasn't being ridiculed. She was being challenged. And instead of answering, instead of defending her position, instead of standing on the Constitution that she claims to represent, the mic went dead. Just like that. That moment right there matters more than anything that she said, because cutting the mic isn't about time. It isn't about decorum. It's about control. You don't like the question, so you kill his mic. Really? That's exactly what happened. And we've seen this pattern before. Town halls, school boards, city councils, campuses. The moment a question threatens the narrative, the system intervenes. That wasn't an accident. It was instinct. The instinct to shut it down before the audience realizes something is wrong. And once people see that, once they feel it, you don't get the room back. So what happened in that room kind of reminds me of something that a viewer told me recently. She said, "My treatment was covered, but not the follow-up visit. I didn't know that." Now, I want you to think about that for a second, okay? You do everything right, you trust your plan, and then when you're at the most vulnerable point in time, the fine print hits you. Her Medicare plan left her exposed at the worst possible time. And this is exactly why I partner with Chapter. Chapter doesn't sell you a plan and disappear. They check every angle of your Medicare coverage, what's covered, what's not, and where people get blindsided so that you don't get these unexpected surprise bills when your health is already the last thing that you should be worrying about. This is too important to have to guess on. Most people, they're already dialing the phone number at the bottom of your screen, 909-563-8279, or they're visiting the website down below, and they're doing this to make sure that they're actually protected. And of course, this is a completely 100% free service for the Ron Yates community. All right, so let's get back to it, guys, because what happens next explains why moments like that mic cutout don't happen by accident. So now let's go ahead and layer this moment over the Charlie Kirk fallout and everything starts to click, okay? So Charlie Kirk, he wasn't just another activist. He was a symbol of unscripted debate, relentless questioning, and unapologetic free speech. Dude was the man, okay? And after his assassination, speech debates stopped being theoretical. I mean, look, conservatives, they watch what happened when rhetoric is labeled dangerous, when words are framed as violence, when debate is treated like a threat. So when AOC freezes at a simple free speech question after Kirk, it doesn't look like confusion. It looks like fear. Fear that another movement could ignite. Fear that an open debate could mobilize millions. Fear that narrative can't survive daylight. So to conservatives, Kirk's legacy proves one thing. Speech suppression doesn't calm tensions, it escalates them. And this is why this town hall moment exploded, because this wasn't about AOC, or it wasn't just about AOC, it was about what happens next. And so this is where the mask came off completely. After Charlie Kirk's death, there was a moment, just a moment, where leaders could have drawn a hard line in defense of free speech, regardless of ideology. AOC didn't do that. Instead, she took to the House floor and attacked Charlie Kirk's rhetoric, not violence, not threats, words, ideas, arguments that she didn't like. That told conservatives everything they needed to know. Because even in death, speech that challenges the left must be discredited, framed as dangerous, and morally condemned. That's not empathy, that is enforcement. The backlash was immediate, not because conservatives worship Charlie Kirk, but because they recognize the pattern. Speech is acceptable only when it's approved. Debate is allowed only when it's controlled. And once you see that pattern, you can't unsee it. This stopped being about one activist. It became about whether dissent itself is being put on trial. So here's the irony that the left didn't expect. The hate speech framework is collapsing even on their own side. I mean, look at the Pam Bondi controversy. The moment she flirted with soft hate speech language, conservatives torched it immediately. There was no hesitation. Why? Because the movement already has learned the lesson. Once you accept the premise that speech can be punished for being offensive, you've already lost. This is why conservatives are now unified around absolute protection, not because they like every opinion, but because they understand where the road leads. Hate speech isn't a legal category, it's a political weapon, and it's becoming rather toxic. The public sees it, the base rejects it, and every time it's invoked, it backfires harder, which is exactly why AOC couldn't answer that question cleanly. Because the trap snapped shut in public. So here's the part that the media just keeps dancing around. Donald J. Trump is president again. That matters a lot because during the Biden years, speech pressure flowed one way. Federal agencies leaned on platforms, bureaucracies whispered about misinformation, enforcement didn't need laws, it just needed leverage. That era is over. Under Trump, the posture flipped. The DOJ isn't hunting speech. Federal pressure campaigns are being unwound. Agencies know that they're being watched very closely. And suddenly, Democrats don't control the referee anymore. This is why moments like AOC's town hall panic hit harder now. There's no institutional safety net. There's no quiet back channel to clean it up. No guarantee that the narrative will be protected after the fact. So when Trump's back in power, the Constitution isn't theoretical, it's enforced. And that reality terrifies a movement that's built on redefining speech. Because without institutional control, their arguments have to stand on their own, and they just don't. This is where AOC revealed the real strategy. She brought up Trump's 2019 tweet about Ilhan Omar reposting Omar's own "some people did something" comment about 9/11 with one line attached: "We will never forget." That wasn't a threat. That wasn't incitement. That was criticism. But AOC labeled it as dangerous. Why? Because this new tactic isn't to ban speech outright. It's to reframe truth as endangerment. If showing someone's own words can be framed as inciting violence, then any criticism can be punished. That's the move. And the constituent called it out immediately. Truth isn't violence, exposure isn't incitement, disagreement isn't danger. But AOC needs those lines blurred because once they're clear, the entire censorship narrative collapses. And in that moment, it did. So this is the quiet part that they usually just don't say out loud. The new strategy isn't banning speech directly. It's redefining incitement so loosely that almost anything qualifies. They call it plausible deniability. They say that the words didn't explicitly call for violence, but they may have made someone feel unsafe, uncomfortable, or emotionally harmed. That's the shift. You see, legal harm is being replaced with emotional harm. Intent is being replaced with interpretation. And all of a sudden, speech becomes punishable based on how someone might react, based on how someone might feel. That's not law, that's control. And you heard it in AOC's language at the town hall. She just kept on circling the same old idea that speech can be dangerous even when it's true, even when it's factual, and even when it's criticism. And so once that standard is accepted, no speech is safe. That's the warning that's being buried in this exchange. And the audience felt it, even if they couldn't articulate it yet. And so here's what the left didn't anticipate. The pushback isn't shrinking, it's accelerating. You see, across the country, conservative audiences are showing up louder, sharper, and more prepared. Turning point events are packed. Campuses that used to silence dissent are now seeing standing room debates. You could feel the shift. Questions are more precise, arguments are tighter, and patience for narrative games is over. This AOC moment didn't scare conservatives into silence, it energized them. Because when people see a microphone cut, a question dodged, or speech reframed as danger, it confirms what they already suspect, that the system doesn't trust open debate. And the more that that's exposed, the more people lean in. This is why these moments keep going viral. Not because of outrage, but because people recognize something real that's breaking through and they want more of it. And so this is the part that explains everything. They don't fear disagreement. They fear unscripted questions because scripted interviews can be managed. Press conferences can be controlled. Prepared statements can be sanitized. But live questions, those expose reality. That is why prove me wrong formats terrify establishment figures. There's no teleprompter. There's no framing. There's no safe language buffer. Just logic versus ideology in real time. And when AOC froze, when she pivoted, when the mic died, it wasn't unique. It was familiar. We've already seen it with school boards, with university administrators, with city councils. The moment a citizen steps outside the approved narrative, the instinct kicks in. Shut it down. Because debate doesn't just challenge arguments, it reveals contradictions. And once those contradictions are exposed, the illusion of moral authority, it collapses instantly. And this is what they're trying to avoid. And this is why moments like this spread. So make no mistake, this was never just about AOC. This wasn't about one town hall. This wasn't about one activist, and it wasn't about one question. It was about a movement that cannot survive open speech. Because when speech is truly free, ideas, they have to compete. They have to withstand scrutiny, and they have to make sense. And some ideas just can't. This is why the lines keep getting blurred. This is why criticism keeps getting called danger. And this is why truth gets labeled incitement. But here's the problem. That question didn't disappear when the mic was cut. It spread. It spread to campuses, to voters, to living rooms. And now, with Trump back in the White House, the institutional guardrails protecting narrative control, oh, they're gone. This wasn't a debate. This was a warning shot. And if history tells us anything, is that once people realize that they're being silenced, they don't stop asking questions. They ask louder ones.